in a car accident. The driver escaped, leaving Baek Yun's parents dead and his sister in a coma. 5 months later, Mina, his sister, woke up, but she was too psychologically preoccupied and had a lifeless face all the time. Baek Yun made the decision to drop out of high school to take care of his younger sister, and he also decided to take the aptitude test. It seemed that, as a result, the brothers' situations had somewhat improved. After the recovery period, Mina's dream for the future was to become a writer. Mina put a lot of effort into her work and wrote a fictional story about how to survive in this world when a person was tiny. The story's main character was a tiny person who was horrifyingly eaten by both rats and spiders. After the accident, Mina appeared to hate everyone, although she always behaved like a kind sister in front of Baek Yun. In the story, there was also a princess, and if the princess died, all the subjects would die. After finishing the compilation, Mina sent it to the publisher of her work. A month later, she learned that her work had been rejected because it featured a female protagonist. As a result, Mina grew more and more disgusted with people and wished that the entire world would shrink to the size of the tiny world in her story. Baek Yun noticed Mina was unhappy and encouraged her to comfort her. After soothing his sister, he proceeded to the mall to buy tteokbokki for Mina, which was her favorite food. Probably, the girl would be happy again after eating it. Just as he was finishing her order, Baek Yun noticed a big mouse under the table. The shopkeeper explained that the mouse had been there for a few days and that they had also called the cleanup party but had not been able to resolve it, so Baek Yun decided not to buy food from this shop for fear of unsanitary conditions. Suddenly, a bright light from behind forced Baek Yun to close his eyes. When he opened them again, the world around him had grown enormously, and Baek Yun had shrunk to such a small size. He thought back to Mina's warning that humans would eventually shrink and become prey for rats and spiders. They could be killed. Would things really go that way? Baek Yun shrank to the size of a tiny child, and in front of him appeared a screen with his nickname, Prince, on it. The prince could see the position of the princess, and on the screen revealing the location of the princess, this was Baek Yun's house, and the princess was Mina. Baek Yun looked around at the chaos around him, wondering what they should do next. Looking at the saleswoman, Baek Yun wondered why she hadn't been transformed into a tiny one yet. The train of thought was just starting to flash through Baek Yun's head when, all of a sudden, a person holding a hot pot of tteokbokki in his hand suddenly shrank down to the size of a tiny person, causing the entire pot to spill downward. Those nearby immediately started to flee the danger area, and those who couldn't run in time could only call for help before becoming exhausted and dying. Baek Yun was terrified when he saw this. People were steadily becoming like what happened in Mina's novel. Everything was frightening. Were people going to die? Baek Yun had no idea what to do now. First and foremost, he had to survive this predicament and find his sister Mina, and he had to use his unknown skills to see what he could do. Initially, he had to move to see others to find out what had happened. Baek Yun was about to leave when he heard a growling sound behind him. When he turned around, he noticed that the mouse under the table that had caused everyone to worry had grown into a massive rat in front of his eyes. The mouse followed after Baek Yun as he started to run. Behind him was a young guy who, because he couldn't run fast enough, was captured and eaten by the rat. When Baek Yun saw this, he tried to run even faster, but his 2 legs couldn't keep up with the rat's 4 legs. The mouse was closing up on Baek Yun, making him wonder if he would be devoured by this rat here. Suddenly, a man appeared and motioned for Baek Yun to lie down. The man then shot sparks from his mouth in the direction of the rat, which caused it to flee after being burned. At this point, everyone in the area started to look into the incident. Jin Chul was the guy who saved Baek Yun, along with his younger brother Min Chul, his old father, and Jin's wife. They were a family walking together when they were caught up in this mess. After saving Baek Yun, Jin felt the need to rest, so he told his younger brother to go talk to Yun. Min Chul inquired about Baek Yun's skills, but Yun wasn't sure what they were exactly. Perhaps Baek Yun's skill was locating everyone using this minimap. Even if they didn't believe it, what they saw had indeed happened, and they needed to figure out how to solve this mess. Min Chul's skill was to strengthen his body, but he was still at level 1, therefore he could only enhance his fists at the moment. Jin Chul's skill was fire breath. Suddenly, Baek Yun thought about his younger sister, Mina. Baek Yun was lost in thought when Jin contacted Min to tell her they needed to move to the bottom floor because it wasn't safe there. Knowing he couldn't go home alone, Baek Yun asked to go with the other 2 brothers, but the decision was made by their father rather than them. The father did not want to offer his hand to assist others in such a dangerous circumstance, so he rejected Baek Yun. Min Chul concurred with his father and believed that Baek Yun had merely entangled their feet. Upon hearing this, Baek Yun spoke up right away to show his strength to their family. He could see where people were and foresee the difficulties that were ahead. Baek Yun pointed forward, where a corpse was being pulled behind a wall by a mantis, suggesting that perhaps the road ahead was too dangerous for them to take but that returning would be even riskier. Suddenly, a red dot flashed on Baek Yun's minimap, signaling that dangerous objects were approaching. As everyone turned their heads, they noticed something moving quickly in their direction. It was a robot vacuum cleaner using the most advanced AI technology. It was equipped with a cutting-edge infrared sensor, and for this vacuum cleaner, they were nothing more than a bunch of trash that needed to be dealt with. The robot identified the target as the individuals in front of it and advanced up. Even a tiny vacuum cleaner was suddenly a terrible danger. Everyone sprinted for the gap ahead, but due to the strength of the woman, Jin Chul's wife was unable to make it in time, tripping and twisting her legs. Jin quickly turned around to pick her up, and Baek Yun ran back to assist him. 3 people, God bless them, were able to make it to the cover just as the vacuum cleaner was about to catch up. The robot rapidly scanned the distant mantis, changed its target, and immediately sliced the mantis into pieces. Jin's wife hurt her ankle after sprinting too fast and tripping. Jin carried his wife, and they continued. Contrary to the loving care of her husband and brother, the father seemed to find this very distressing, viewing the daughter-in-law as a weight they must carry. After working out hard, Baek Yun was extremely thirsty. He also noticed that his father's eyes were unmistakably fixed on his daughter-in-law. As they walked towards the escalator, Baek Yun used the minimap to figure out that there were 3 insects at the bottom of the stairs, so Min decided it was safer to take the emergency stairs. There were numerous emergency staircase users who were also able to exit, but this one needed to be climbed. Since the woman's condition didn't appear to be very good, they opted to take the escalator, and the crowd again rushed to the escalator. Baek Yun wanted to know how people found their skills, so he asked Min how they did it. Min said that if Yun shouted the name of the skill and its level in his head, a hologram would appear, and he just had to imitate it. Baek Yun listened, then quickly imitated, and the 3D image actually emerged in front of him. On this side, Min Chul was taking turns carrying his sister-in-law to assist his brother. Baek Yun checked the map and noticed that Mina was still at home, so he was determined to meet his sister. Due to Yun's negligence in not detecting the minimap signal, the mouse from earlier reappeared and flew towards everyone. It appeared that it had recovered and returned to get revenge. The rat then charged forward. Jin employed the fire breath technique earlier, but it appeared that this move did not work on the mouse as it continued to run at everyone. Baek Yun used a newly discovered skill to suddenly jump forward and surround everyone with a barrier. The rat kept running to attack Baek Yun's barrier, but as soon as it rushed forward, it was knocked out. Unable to break through the barrier, the rat switched targets. The brother's father, who was on the edge of the wall, was attacked by the mouse, who galloped at him. Min Chul hastily threw his sister-in-law to the ground and ran to his father to save him, but the rat rushed ahead too soon and chewed off one of his arms. This infuriated Min even more, so he risked his life by using his skills to punch the rat, sending it flying. The rat then ran away, leaving the father with one arm missing. Everyone stared nervously at the elderly man, and Jin Chul and his wife also ran towards their father. The father said something in Jin Chul's ear that made his face look suspicious. Although one arm was ripped off, the father still seemed very calm, surprising Baek Yun. Jin Chul abruptly summoned Baek Yun to assist him in picking up his father, but Baek Yun's legs seemed to be immobilized. He did not move but buried his foot in place, and then he noticed the murderous air radiating from the father. Jin had to go and pull Baek Yun's hand but was knocked out by Baek Yun. The father's entire body seemed to be about to transform into something. Jin's wife was nearby, so the father grabbed her arm. The two let out wailing cries that sounded like the old father was absorbing blood from Jin's wife. When they discussed each person's skill earlier, the old man said his ability was absorbing and thought it was useless because it couldn't be used. Jin's wife said she had no abilities, which made the old man chastise her for being useless. However, Jin's wife's talent was actually self-destruction, which was activated when life was in danger, and at this moment, the self-destruct skill was activated. Jin ran over to the two of them to dissuade them, but it didn't seem as though he was in time. He was too late to run over to rescue his two relatives. The self-destruct skill was activated, which meant that Jin's wife would be destroyed accordingly. As a result, the cracks in her face appeared, and Baek Yun created a barrier to prevent danger to himself and Min Chul. Soon after, a large explosion occurred, killing all three of Min Chul's relatives. Baek Yun felt like he was in hell. He knew that being kind would not save him, and in order to see Mina again, he needed to retain his cool. When Baek Yun learned that a location had radiation contamination, he immediately opened the minimap and realized it was his location. He unexpectedly realized that Mina had previously included this detail in her composition. He asked her why she had done so, and she responded that if it were left out, people would simply flee, causing no stress. However, suddenly, it was occurring right in front of Baek Yun. Polluted air was gradually spreading towards them. Min Chul was still sobbing and collapsing on the ground because his entire family had died, but if it stayed that way, both of them would die. As a result, Baek Yun decided to get up and depart on his own. He had just taken 2 steps when Min Chul stood up and offered to accompany Yun, so he had no choice but to continue moving. Through the small map, Baek Yun noticed that the insects at the bottom of the stairs had vanished, so the two of them decided to go down. However, Baek Yun had not anticipated that his map would only last 30 minutes in a day, and today it had been used up, leaving them to rely on fate. The two walked to the top of the stairs and noticed a large crowd. They were in a dangerous situation because the escalator moved so quickly. Min Chul decided to go down first and told Baek Yun to follow. However, as soon as he finished speaking, a giant cat appeared behind them and screamed, scattering everyone in its path. Despite the cat's rapid movements, they all jumped down the escalator one by one. Like everyone else, Baek Yun and Min Chul went in the direction of the escalator. As they were about to run down, however, they saw 2 old grandparents, a mother with her child, and another person who was falling in the distance. They hurried to help. The cat raised its paws and was about to pounce on the people when Baek Yun triggered the barrier to protect everyone. The barrier was definitely stronger than he expected, but the physical fatigue was too quick. Suddenly, the young man standing behind Baek Yun stepped up and offered to assist him. When the child reached out to touch Baek Yun, all signs of exhaustion disappeared. Yoon Soo had the ability to recover, and Min Chul hoped that miracles would happen and that he could heal the dead. However, the boy's abilities could only heal the living. Min Chul didn't want to stand there any longer, so he told Baek Yun to pause his skills so he could deal with the giant cat. As the giant cat attacked them, Min Chul used his fist-strengthening abilities to fight it. Behind him, Yoon Soo's mother, who had the ability to amplify the power of others, assisted, making Min Chul's fists many times stronger. Baek Yun couldn't stand still and triggered the barrier to attack the cat. Because of Yoon Soo's mother's power amplification abilities, Baek Yun was able to shape barriers of any shape. The cat fled with the help of everyone. If it had stayed any longer, it would have only had a body, so it fled first. The 2 elderly people thanked them for saving them. The old man's skill was analyzing other people's abilities, but for Baek Yun, the old man was unable to analyze anything, and the old woman's skill was forecasting, but she was unable to predict the futures of others. Perhaps only they could see their own futures, and she could only assist them in doing so. She grasped Baek Yun's hand in order for him to see his own future, and it appeared that the future was not very good, so Baek Yun looked quite frozen, and he then begged Yoon Soo to recover himself again, adding to Yoon Soo's mother's amplification skills. With everyone's help, Baek Yun built barriers and assisted everyone safely down the steps. All of them had grown increasingly sympathetic to Baek Yun. After regaining consciousness, Baek Yun was able to continue using the minimap. When they got off the escalator, they had to go through the revolving door in order to get out. Once they started, radioactive contamination would hit them from all sides, but this was the only way out, so they had to act quickly before it was too late. The area in front of the rotating door was also crowded with people. While a normal-sized person could easily pass through, a small person would have to run 100 meters in 15 seconds or risk being swept away by the door if they were unable to do so in time. It was difficult to get through this door. This side had a couple who appeared to be exchanging one last kiss. The guy ran to the front to model for his girlfriend and managed to get out. The girl also ran through the revolving door, but just as she was about to escape, she was so exhausted that she was swept away by it. It was only a small distance to get out, and the difference between life and death was just as thin as a thread. Everyone who witnessed this was terrified, and the boyfriend could only scream helplessly as he watched his girlfriend perish. The old woman who witnessed this scene used her abilities on the old man so that he could see the future and inform her. The old man saw that as long as they followed Baek Yun, they would successfully escape, but it appeared that the old man saw something else. It took the help of everyone to get out. As far as Baek Yun could see, He would be able to get everyone out safely if he did what the old woman said. Yoon Soo would be carried out first by Baek Yun and Min Chul, after which the two successfully ran from the rotating door with all their effort. Escaping through the revolving door, Baek Yun abruptly informed Min Chul his home address and stated Mina was his last remaining relative, and he begged Min Chul to find Mina if he was dead, since if Mina died, everyone would die, but now it was a mission to save everyone. Baek Yun used a barrier to block the spinning door, and Yoon Soo's grandparents and mother escaped outside, but the barrier didn't last long, and the two grandparents appeared to have run out of energy. Baek Yun was trying his best to keep a barricade in place so that the three people could escape, but the barrier was gradually cracking. 3 people were trying to flee, but the 2 elderly people were finding it difficult to move quickly any longer. When the 2 elderly people suddenly fell, Min Chul hurriedly ran in, picked the elderly woman up, and ran out. Baek Yun was about to become insufferable, and the old man realized he couldn't flee in time, although Baek Yun was doing everything he could to save everyone. The elderly man didn't want the young guy to have to work so hard for an old man. He saw the future through the old woman's abilities that he would most likely still be alive, but Baek Yun would pass away from exhaustion. Baek Yun must have seen it through the old woman's prophecy, so he gave Min Chul the address. If the elderly man had escaped, he would also have died in 3 hours, so he decided to die here. As soon as everyone had successfully made it outside, they turned around to see the elderly man still standing there, waving to them. He may have decided that this was the best option for him at the time, as he was soon swept away by the revolving door. Baek Yun felt very bad for not being able to save everyone. Yun understood that the old guy died for Yun. The old woman soothed and encouraged Yun when she observed the serene expression on the old man's face at the end of his life. Baek Yun could only apologize and cry since it took too much physical strength to save everyone, so he fell asleep on the ground. Everyone was wondering about their next move after coming out. The old woman's family had emigrated abroad. She had planned to return to her hometown with her husband, but now she would most likely have to go alone. Min Chul, who had no relatives, decided to go with Baek Yun to meet Mina. The elderly woman held Min's hand so he could see his fate, and Min Chul unexpectedly saw a gigantic figure in the future and dimly saw Baek Yun's death, wondering what this was and whether there were people who were not small. Yoon Soo's mother stated she could help the old woman by strengthening her, and as soon as Yoon Soo used her amplification powers on the elderly woman, she was able to see her own future. The elderly woman had a horrific vision of death in the future and realized that Yoon Soo would also die if he followed Baek Yun. She grasped Yoon Soo's hand to aid him in seeing his future. By leveling up, people might see more future turning points. Yoon Soo, who saw that Baek Yun would perish for saving him, cried. Yoon Soo's mother consoled him and assured him that Baek Yun would survive. People around them began boarding train stations to return or go wherever they needed. Yoon Soo also knew where to go after seeing the future, and the old woman also made the decision to return to her village. They said goodbye and said they would definitely see each other later, and the old woman believed in this as well. Min Chul would be accompanying Baek Yun, so he stayed here. Baek Yun finally awoke, and the two pondered how to get out of here. Suddenly, a man appeared and stated he wanted the two of them to join him in going out. They also headed to Isu Station, and then the other man vanished. His skill was teleporting. Baek Yun had just expended all of his energy, so he was exhausted and in need of rest. Min Chul carried him to continue because if they stayed here for a long time, they would become radioactively contaminated. Despite this, Baek Yun still felt resentment toward the elderly woman for being unable to save her husband. As soon as enough people had gathered, they began to move. Suddenly, a large fire broke out in the street, and Baek Yun realized that this was not the city he had previously known due to the numerous car fires, electrical shorts, and broken water pipes that were raging around the city. The ward president and leader, Kim Suk, spoke up. He drew out a roadmap for everyone and pointed out that they needed to work together to survive. Min Chul thought they could trust him because he had a reputation for being dependable and hardworking. The ward chief instructed the Go chief to inform everyone of the time and the way. Go then soared into the air, looked in all directions, and instructed everyone to make their way to the north because the roads and alleys would be relatively safe. The ward president started directing people, and they felt fortunate to be on his team. But then, out of nowhere, a pigeon came up and grabbed Chief Go, and the bird later swallowed Chief Go in its stomach and flew away as if nothing had happened. This startled and alarmed everyone below. Using the small map, Baek Yun missed the road that Chief Go had given them. It was dangerous and full of risks, If they traveled that way, they would become bird prey. However, the ward president insisted that they should believe Chief Go because he had risked his life to provide them with information. They were about to move when Baek Yun stopped them, claiming that the road was dangerous but that taking Baek Yun's safe route would take a lot of time. The ward president didn't want Baek Yun to waste their time, so he quickly surpassed Baek Yun with his skills, making Baek Yun speechless. Baek Yun couldn't talk, making everyone think he wasn't confident enough in his plan, so he was quiet. Taking advantage of the situation, the chief said 2 or 3 words that made people trust him, and in the end, they opted to walk the road that Chief Go had sacrificed to show them. Min Chul stopped Baek Yun from leaving just as he was about to do so. After walking away for a while, Baek Yun was able to speak again. Min Chul explained that since they couldn't save everyone, they needed to take care of themselves first. Then, out of nowhere, Baek Yun seemed to recall something and used the minimap to find the old woman, Yoon Soo, and his mother in order to find the boy. Yoon Soo was in danger. As Yoon Soo and his mother were traveling with the group and the boy needed to relieve himself, he insisted on going to the other corner. His mother told him that he couldn't separate the group from them, so they should go close, but Yoon Soo insisted on going, so his mother followed his demands. After Yoon Soo's mother notified the two in front that she needed to take her son to urinate, they claimed that the group would walk slowly and instructed the mother to follow them fast. The moment Yoon Soo and his mother turned the corner, the boy suddenly grabbed hold of his mother's sleeve and warned her not to go down that dangerous path again because the 2 people they had earlier spoken to had all passed away. In the near future, Yoon Soo and his mother would also die from radiation poisoning at Isu Station, and Yoon Soo's abilities would not be sufficient to cure them. The mother scolded Yoon Soo for not notifying her sooner. If he had, they could have rescued everyone. Yoon Soo responded that he was concerned that if he spoke out, people would disturb him and demand something from his mother, so he chose to remain silent. The mother and son cried and hugged each other, concluding that it was too difficult for kids to be quiet, and they then made the decision to go look for Yoon Soo's father. On this side, Baek Yun was much less concerned after discovering that the mother and boy were still alive. Baek Yun noticed it was probably because Yoon Soo saw the future and they survived. Since Yoon Soo and his mother were still alive and the rest of the group was dead, Min Chul questioned whether it was possible that the group members had been fighting until they died. These thoughts simply passed through their minds as they focused on taking care of themselves. Baek Yun also checked Bok Ja's location and discovered that she was still alive. Min Chul believed Baek Yun's tiny map to be similar to a satellite that could locate people and provide them with safe routes to take. Thanks to the tiny map, the two found a safe route and continued on, and when it was almost dark, they decided to stop at the grocery shop to eat something before going on. In front of them was a car that appeared to have been attacked and had broken down. It appeared that this was someone Baek Yun knew, so the two got inside of it using Baek Yun's barrier and opened the car door. Inside was a female, Aram, Baek Yun's friend. Aram awoke thinking she was still dreaming. She turned back and forth looking for her father, but he was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, there was a person locked in the air conditioner gap in the car. It was Aram's father. Aram covered a white cloth over her father after she had him down. Aram felt very guilty for calling her father to pick her up. After the party with her friends, Aram called her father to pick her up. She was wearing a seatbelt, but her father wasn't. As a result, when the accident occurred, Aram was still in the chair, and her father flew up to the air conditioning gap and died there. If Dad hadn't gone to pick Aram up, he wouldn't have died that way. Aram felt bad and could only cry. Baek Yun encouraged her to hide her pain, and now they could only choose to go on and look for other loved ones. They couldn't sit here grieving forever. The 3 of them got out of the car by Baek Yun's barricade, with Aram still perplexed by the chaos happening in front of her. After hearing Baek Yun's explanation and assurance that she would soon discover her own skills, Aram had a sudden idea about the name and level of an ability. Immediately, an image of herself appeared before her eyes, and she was able to control it with her thoughts. Aram's power was to think, but it seemed that utilizing it required a lot of energy. Therefore, Baek Yun advised her to use it only when necessary. Min Chul introduced himself to Aram, and after his greeting, Baek Yun asked her to accompany him back home to Jae Yun's house. Aram immediately remembered her mother, and Baek Yun checked the tiny map to see if Aram's mother was still alive. However, before they could go back, they needed to go to the grocery store because they hadn't eaten anything all day and their stomachs were growling. The 3 of them were walking when they heard something terrifying. Next to them were a colony of ants that were ready to move, and in front of them was a dead dog. A tiny ant was now a giant in the tiny world, and above the dog, flies were flying. Fortunately, it appeared that because the ants were hunting, they didn't pay attention to Baek Yun. The three were on their way when they noticed a person nearby who was about to approach them. A bird came in and beamed down on the dead dog, scattering flies and trimming the bait until all that was left of the dead dog was its carcass. Baek Yun had just said that the birds didn't seem to mind the three of them when suddenly one bird returned. The chase began again, and they decided to flee to the grocery store for safety. Baek Yun followed behind, using a barrier to help Min Chul and Aram flee faster towards the grocery store, but that was why he almost couldn't keep up. As soon as the three raced into the grocery store, Aram utilized her powers to stop the bird and successfully save Baek Yun. The bird, unable to chase its prey, flew away. Aram, worn out and collapsing after using her strength, adored Baek Yun because she merely knew her skills and could use them so skillfully. The three of them were very hungry, and Aram used her thoughts to take down the cake up high, and then the other two people tore it apart. Aram stated that this was the first time she had seen Baek Yun in this form, and she encouraged the two of them to take a shower right away. Aram was nice enough to use her powers to open the bottle for the two of them. Although embarrassed, Baek Yun and Min Chul decided to finally take a shower. The two felt revived again as Min Chul criticized Baek Yun for being thin and displayed his muscular muscles. Baek Yun told Min Chul that if he wanted to go back, he could because Baek Yun could keep himself safe, but Min Chul said he would follow Baek Yun because he couldn't let Baek Yun die. Min Chul recalled the future he foresaw when the elderly woman used her prophetic ability. He foresaw the risk of leaving Baek Yun's life behind, but he was already confident they would survive until then. Min Chul then made the decision to find out what it was and to disrupt those seemingly certain futures. The three decided to continue moving after eating and taking a break. Baek Yun had already used up his time using the minimap, but before that, he had already seen all the safe routes for the three of them. At this point, Aram suddenly recalled her time in Japan, where, at the time, she was reading a novel online that was somewhat similar to the one that existed now. Baek Yun questioned why she chose to read Mina's book. Aram explained that it was a highly coveted novel in Japan at the time, written by a wife, and that everyone in the story, including the wife, was shrunk down. However, the story was never published because the author abruptly stopped writing. The reason given was plagiarism. Numerous countries had such a plot. Baek Yun was skeptical that the novel was not Mina's creation. He remembered Mina's words and felt strange about this. The three then continued on the long road. It was already dark, and the streetlights were turned on. Baek Yun walked while lost in thought. According to Mina's novel, everyone would kill each other. Would this actually happen? He was deep in thought when Aram called to check on Mina's situation. Aram didn't know how to inform her mother about her father's death, but at least they still had family waiting at home, but Min Chul had no one left. They were walking when they heard an odd noise, and in front of them was a burned-out car. Although people had been shrunk, the street lights and traffic lights were still on, suggesting that either some people were still unable to leave their positions or perhaps some people had not been shrunk. If this were the case, it would be too good. The lines of thought appeared in each person's mind in turn. Was there a healing capacity to make people return to normal? Suddenly, two individuals in the distance approached this side. They were the ward president and the guy who had initially invited the two to join his guild. There were just two people left after everyone in the group had already died. Just like Baek Yun said, the path they chose was filled with pigeons, so everyone lost their lives. Only the head of the department Cho and the ward chairman survived. He still suffered injuries to his arm. Is it because they tried to save everyone but their ability didn't allow it, or they abandoned everyone and ran away on their own? Those thoughts flashed through Baek Yun's mind. Looking at the head of the department Cho and the ward chief, it seems that the two of them are tired. The ward chairman also blamed the head of the department. Cho just tried a little harder, but he was too tired. Due to each skill and everyone's physical strength, the ability will be consumed. Like Min Chul has good stamina, so he can use the skill continuously and still be fine. After that, they continued to cross the asphalt road to the other side of the road. After passing this gate, there is another gate. They continued to have to overcome the brick wall. Baek Yun was thinking about how to get through when a swarm of ants appeared. Perhaps this is where these ants live. Immediately, the ward chairman clung to the head of the department Cho and used his teleportation skill to pass quickly, leaving everyone below. Manager Cho wondered if it was right to leave everyone like that. But for the ward president, keep your own life first, then others don't mind them. The three people left below did not panic because of that. They started fighting the ants. Baek-yeon created a barrier to protect everyone. Min-chul used his fist to tackle the ants one by one. Aram used his power of thought to control the ants. As if getting some strength from somewhere, Aram controlled his thoughts, causing the brick to rise from the ground, causing the ants to fly out. The ward chairman and the head of the department showed that their mouths were wide open in surprise, not expecting them to have such strong skills. If they were with them, the people in the group would not have to die. Especially Aram's strength surprised them the most. They would definitely survive if there was Aram. After using the power of thought to throw the brick, Aram seemed exhausted. Baek-yeon immediately went to help her to the front building to rest to regain her strength. And Min-chul stayed to beat the ants, although he felt a little scared, but he had to fight. After entering the building, the two young people sat down to regain their strength. Baek-yeon felt very admired with Aram's strength. She herself did not expect to have such great strength. Maybe Aram's power is the strongest even though the continuity is a bit weak. Min-chul, after defeating all the remaining ants, the ward chairman and Chief Cho immediately returned to the ground. The three of them walked towards the building when they saw a young couple sitting together in front of them. Because Aram was too tired to fall asleep, everyone felt that this place was quite safe, so they decided to stop and take a short nap. To ensure safety, they often guard each other. Min-chul volunteered to guard first to let everyone sleep. When everyone fell asleep, Min-chul also fell into his thoughts. Right now everything is fine, but as time goes by, it will be different. Even though they haven't been together for long, they have fought together, have become comrades. Thinking and falling asleep ever since, Min-chul opened his eyes to see Aram had woken up. Chief Cho had gone out to scout the surrounding situation. Baek-yeon also woke up soon after. He opened the minimap and found his way forward. After determining the way, everyone decided to continue because it was just a waste of time here. As they were about to leave, the ward chairman called out to the three of them to stop. He knows that family is important, but so is society. The ward office needs him. He wanted them to go to the ward office first. At this time the head of the department Cho also scouted the way back to the safe office. As soon as he finished speaking, the ward chairman's body suddenly floated in the air. Aram used his power of thought to make him fly. It's obvious that just before, you only cared about yourself, but now it's arrogant to talk about society. Aram was so fed up with this three-faced ward chairman that he took him up high to breathe in the fresh air. Who does he think he is that they should obey? Head of department Cho was about to stop Aram when she sent her flying with the ward chairman. After a few words of negotiation, Aram also let them down. The ward chairman, after seeing this scene, the more he thought he had to bring Aram with her because she was too strong. The ward chief began to give reasons for people to go to the ward committee first. In this chaotic situation, everyone needs to adapt, so it is necessary for a ward chief like him to take the lead to calm the people. But in the committee it is not only him, there will be other people to guide everyone in his place. Seeing Baek-yeon interrupt his words, the ward chief immediately used his skills to suppress him. He gave sweet words to entice Aram to follow him. If he went to the ward committee first, he would prioritize saving Aram's family. Seeing Min-chul about to continue to antagonize the ward president, the head of the department Cho acted again. Suddenly, he used his power to teleport, causing a shoe